Hey, it's Cody from the Keepers of Nerddom. Chris will be joining me shortly for our future videos. I just wanted to take a moment and reminisce for a little bit about things that many of us that are gamers that are super nerdy enjoy, and that is old school video games. You know, we could go all the way back to the Atari era, and I'm right here actually because most of my collection is down right here in this little drawer. You know, we could talk about, oh my, that's Dusty. Whew, he hasn't been out for a little while. We talk about such things as Space Invaders, right? The classic, and you can see all the dust on this sucker. It has gotten some layers. But you know, you could talk about these things, but let's be honest, the Atari really set things kind of in motion. But then things crashed, and eventually arcades and stuff took off. But also, one of the big things that happened alongside, you know, the first there was arcades going along, and then Atari was introduced in there as well. But whenever the regular Nintendo became a thing and it was in your home, and all of a sudden there's a reality of video games could look really pretty good, not necessarily as good as the arcade consoles, because you had an entire cabinet dedicated to one game, maybe two if it was something really fancy. But you could have a little console that could play 8-bit graphics games. And what a cool thing. I want to just share with you some of my top favorites of the regular Nintendo. There are some great games out there because I could talk for hours, and I don't want to bore you with all the amazing ones, but with all the things that I could reminisce on. But there are so many great games, and I want to share those with you right quick. First one is this little game. It's just called Guerrilla War. And it's funny, it's Guerrilla War, you can see the war on there. But interesting game that it was 2 players, and you were essentially going through and freeing a country from a tyrant. And ironically, I think you're like Che Guevara. And it's kind of a weird, interesting look back into history. Nowadays you kind of go, that's a little messed up, but back then it was something that you know, this was made in Japan, so to them it didn't mean the same as to us. It's kind of an interesting thing, and it's a great game for a shooter game that's top down, a lot of fun, and especially for 2-player, you can just have a blast with each other going through these levels and beating the bosses and getting to the end. And man, good memories. Another thing, side note, one of probably the worst games in many ways, because it's not much of a game. You're trying to look through pixels to find Waldo. Terrible. Don't buy this unless you're just a collector of Nintendo games, because it's a mess. Right, here's a good one. Here is definitely one of my personal favorites. I am not a big sports fan per se, but this game, something about it always was fun. And until you realize that, as with many games, they're not balanced, especially ones that couldn't have updates. And one of the funny things is once you discover where Bo Jackson was in the game, for the Raiders, you realize you have the most powerful runner in the entire game. And then once you also realized where Jerry Rice was for the 49ers, you could catch anything. There was times where I would be playing this game and would have Jerry Rice, and he would catch the ball with 3 or 4 people blocking him on him, and he would still catch it. And it was fun. You wouldn't stop talking about it after that, and how mad your opponent was that it just happened, but you'd never forget it either. So it's a great game. Highly recommend that one. Like I said, a super big nerd, and one of these, I can't say that I would recommend it necessarily, but it's the Star Trek game, the 25th anniversary even. Really fancy stuff here. It is a puzzle game in many ways. It's got a little bit of shooting in it and stuff too, but it is very much a puzzle game, and it is hard. I mean, I had written down the puzzles for all these things you can see. Like, it was weird. You know, I don't even know if this was the right puzzle code. I guess it is. But, you know, it had codes and stuff also. Man, it got intense. It was a good game if you like puzzle games, but it's also a really hard game because back then, one of the interesting things was you'd go to some function and whatnot and talk with your friends, and they would say, oh yeah, there was this certain thing that I read or saw, and you wouldn't know, especially if you didn't have internet. and you'd had to either take them at their word or go try it. And it was really interesting to see these things, especially like with Super Mario Brothers 3, where somebody would say, well, there's a warp whistle in the first world in the little miniature castle. You're like, no, there's no way. But when you found it and realized that it was true, how cool. Man, we, with that being said, can't not talk about Super Mario Brothers, the original one, and we had Duck Hunt. What's sad is Duck Hunt doesn't work on modern TVs because they're not CRT, and it's unfortunate because Duck Hunt is such a great game as well. But Super Mario Brothers, that took us to a different level. The graphics weren't great, but those levels, you never forget your first time playing Mario. And there's been better games in many ways than Mario 1 for sure, but Super Mario Brothers really did get you to that appreciation of Mario, because there had been stuff before that in the arcades, but this was the intro for many people. So some other highlights. Bass Pro Fishing, forgot about that. The Black Bass was what that was called. Tetris was another one that we always should talk about for sure. Tetris is great. Tetris it's so simple and yet so addictive, and that's why it's kept going for years and years. You never get bored with this one, and it even says "From Russia with Fun." That's interesting, especially when this would have been out. There's still tension, so it's an interesting thing. Tetris, classic, but still, as they have now, like Battle Royale Tetris, it just keeps going, and that's really cool. Oh man, okay. Side note, mine's got something shaking around inside of it, but for some reason it still plays, so I don't know what it is, but something's loose in there. This is Rampart. If you ever get a chance to play it, it's you build your little base, you get cannons, and then you try to destroy each other's bases if you're playing against each other, and then every round you get to rebuild and try again if you're able to fill it back in. It's kind of like a Tetris in some ways too, it reminds me of. Great game. I'd never heard of this. We found it in a flea market years ago, bought it, found out it was fantastic little game. Great stuff. They're the hidden gems of Nintendo games, because there's a lot of them that aren't good at all. Like, they're terrible. But then there's some like that you can just have an absolute blast with. And I'm missing some of those too, I don't have everything. Speaking of somewhat good, somewhat bad, is Captain America and the Avengers. This game is hard. Like, it reminds me of the Ninja Turtles games, and those are another ones that I'm missing from my collection, but they can be really challenging. And this one can kick your butt, because you have to meet up. I believe you start with Hawkeye and Captain America, and you have to try to meet up with each other. And if you don't make it to each other, then one of you, if they survive, has to go rescue the other one and recover their body, essentially, and bring them back. And it's hard. It's a tough game, and I haven't played it for many years. But what an interesting thing, because back then the difficulty was definitely on a different level. Well, let's just talk about a few of these other things right here. Super Mario Brothers 3. Let's be very honest. This is the classic. This is the thing that many people remember the regular Nintendo for. And the graphics in some ways weren't quite as in depth as number 2, which was a copy and paste over a different game. But Super Mario Brothers 3 had so much in it, and Mario looked so much better than the first game. And it's just it hits that puzzle platforming, well, just really platforming and side-scrolling adventure so well. And getting to the end and fighting Bowser, so memorable and so powerful. And the floating ships, who can forget those? Great game that you never forget playing Super Mario Brothers 3. The next few things I want to talk about, I think this is a good one right here to start with, is Metroid. I hadn't actually played this, and we were finally able to get a hold of it, and I sat down and played it through all the way, and I got so excited playing this that I went straight to the Super Nintendo version as well, because this was so good. I was shocked, because you see the graphics, and they're not great. It's 8-bit. And especially when they actually put the graphics on the cartridge, you kind of get a little nervous of what is this? but yet at the same time, they knew what they had, and what they had was amazing. And it is a great platformer, puzzle game, side-scrolling adventure that they don't tell you much, and it's hard, and it's amazing. And it led to so many other great games. Like the Super Nintendo version of this is fantastic as well because it just built on what they learned from this. Such a good game. Highly recommend that one for sure. Aha. Oh, there it is. We're getting up to the top best ones right here for sure. Punch Out. I don't know why number 1's written on here, but here's the deal. Punch Out is, again, simple game based off of arcade stuff. Fantastic. You get to experience this idea of fighting with Mike Tyson, and to my memory, I don't know that I've ever beaten him yet. I haven't tried for many years since I was a kid, but man, King Hippo, Piston Honda, all these different characters, Soda Popinski, yeah, what a name. I love it. But this game, man, when you learn the patterns, it becomes more of a memorization game. And there's apparently people now that can just do this blindfolded because they know the pattern of the game. Such a great game. Such a win. The next thing for me would definitely be, this is towards the very top for sure, Kirby's Adventure. You know, when you see the idea of a little pink ball, you know, not now, because now we know who Kirby is, but back then, I didn't think anything of this, and then I popped it in and I realized the graphics on this game are insane for this regular Nintendo. They are insanely good. I don't know how they did it in many ways. And the functionality of the game is fantastic. Like, Kirby has the ability to suck up people and get their powers in a regular Nintendo game. Like, that's amazing. You know, that's so cool that they came so far in the time frame, because you see early generation regular Nintendo games, and then you see late gen stuff, and they're vastly different. They're vastly different. That'll probably come to the next one as well right here. And it's cool to see that they transform. And Kirby's Adventure, it's a great game that is so fun. It's like Mario, but it has extra stuff in it. It's like they took everything they learned from the Mario series and went, let's go bigger. And they did. And Kirby's Adventure wins that. This is another one that I had to get a hold of, and I don't actually have an original copy. This is Little Samson. This is a knockoff, but I got it as a console, you know, cartridge form so I could play it in at least its original type of format. And I've got to say, everything I heard about this game is true. It is amazing, and honestly, it almost, kind of along with Kirby's Adventure, could have been on the Super Nintendo. It's just that good and that full. You know, the graphics of this one probably aren't as fancy in some ways as Kirby's Adventure, but yet the things it portrays on screen, like you see dragons and you see things and you can clearly tell it's a dragon and not just an 8-bit try at a dragon. Like, it's good. And it's so much fun to play this because you have 4 different characters that do 4 different things and you can switch between them. But I will say the boss fights in this game can be crazy. They can kick your butt. And there's going to be always, you know, somebody in the comments that goes, oh, dude, I can beat those in my sleep, and I'm glad for you. That's awesome. I'll be honest, I struggled because this game will stretch you. It will make you a bigger, better player of Nintendo games and games as a whole, because it teaches you to think on your feet of, okay, I need this character instead of the one I'm using because he jumps higher, or they can fly, or they can fit in the smaller space. And it's a great game of a side-scroller, but also with that puzzle behind the scenes of how do you succeed with what you have. Great game. Highly recommend it. If you ever get a chance to play it, do it. Little Samson is amazing, and it's hard too. It will kick your butt too. There's 2 other ones I want to share with you because there's so many great regular Nintendo games. And my number 2 game for me is definitely The Legend of Zelda, right? The first of the Zelda series, right? Which is always funny to me because it's The Legend of Zelda, but the focus is on Link. And talk about a great game. A top-down puzzle game with dungeon crawling and everything you could imagine. Side note, the second game's not nearly as interesting as this one, but yeah, I'm glad they tried with it because it gave us a lot of interesting details and things that we now understand and see in like Smash Brothers are like the down stabs and up stabs. Those things came from that. But The Legend of Zelda, I remember as a kid trying to figure that out and finally having access to the internet because I couldn't find like the entrance to World 7 or Dungeon 7 or 8, I can't remember. And finally going, oh, you have to push this rock up this way and that rock this way. And, it was a little bit of a puzzle thing that they don't explain it. And that's the beauty of old Nintendo games. They don't explain things. They give you just enough to be dangerous, to have fun, but not know everything. And this game, man, so good and so challenging and so hard, and beating Ganon at the end is worth its weight. It is so fun. And plus the fact that we got gold cartridges for it and its successor. If you haven't played the first game of the Legend of Zelda series, you need to, because it really shows you how far they've come, but also it's a great game even today. Does it look good if you're playing it in this format? No, not at all. It's 8-bit graphics, but let's be honest. If they can fit that much in back then and that much creativity, then it's amazing to appreciate everything that they've done in the years past. Like, it's amazing because here we are, we've seen Breath of the Wild, and, they just came out with a redo of, what was it, a Link to the Past? Link's Awakening. Link's Awakening from the Game Boy, and I love that little game. That game is great. And they have all their ties back to that one game. But my number one regular Nintendo game, it is right here. Keep it in its little sleeve protector. It is the original Final Fantasy. Because when you know the story of this game, for one, that makes it really special, because this was their last ditch effort. It was their Final Fantasy, as it were, and they were going to be out of money, and this thing actually did well, and it took off, and it was fantastic. I have played through this at least once, if not a few other times. And it's actually a big game, especially if you're a power type gamer in that sense, especially when I was back then, of this desire to make sure you were the best of the best. And especially when you heard the rumor that there was a secret boss. There was a secret boss even in this game, the very first one. And that's something that Final Fantasy is all about all the time still. And back then, that was a thing. When I found out about that, I finally discovered that secret boss, fought it, got my butt kicked, and realized I need another like 15, 20 levels to even have a hope. And I did, and I went back in and fought it. And if you know, it's a secret war mech that will show up with a 1 in like 100 or 50 chance or something. I can't remember. It's a little bit rare, but it's in like the final room right before the last boss. And it's actually way harder than the final boss of the game. And really cool. Like, this is an RPG, and you have turn-based stuff. Like, it's old school things. Like, playing it now, it would feel very dated. It's slow, but it is a beautiful game in the context of what it is. And so many Final Fantasies up to like 7 were so similar to this as far as that turn-based stuff. And it all comes from this little game. And like, you have to think about what you could do in this game. It was so cool. When you started the game, I believe you could name your characters. You could pick the different types of characters. So you had 4 different characters. And so you had the ability to customize a team. And how fascinating that was to have a team that you built. And then what was really cool is as you went, you got to customize with different armor and weapons and whatnot. Usually you just looked for the best of the best. But with the spells, that's where things got interesting, because you had a limited, finite space in your spell slots for these spells, and so you had to choose. And that's fascinating. Like, the game had the ability to that. It could save it, and it was one of those games in the regular Nintendo time frame that didn't operate off of a code that you would put in, like the Mega Man series. I have Mega Man around here somewhere, I think, but I don't know where he's at. But it had a battery backup in it, same as Legend of Zelda. This idea, and a few games have that, and it's so cool whenever you get that, because you could just turn it back on and be right where you left off. and you didn't have to input a code. You just had, let's go, let's start the game. And that was such a special thing back then. And Final Fantasy just had everything about it. Like, it takes a long time to get through it if you're wanting to see everything and do everything. And what's also cool is you eventually get a point where you don't even have to technically ever do it, but you can superclass each of your classes, and they have like adult bodies instead. But you don't technically ever have to do it. You could just bypass it, from what I remember. And it was really cool because then your stats went up like quite a bit, and all of a sudden the black belt would hit like 7 or 8 times in a turn whenever he would go. And I mean, he would do massive damage. Then the warrior guy, or fighter, I don't remember what they call him, he would just hit usually 2 or 3 times at most, but really hard. And it was really cool just to see the difference in how they functioned. And honestly, that Final Fantasy game, led to, I don't remember which one led to first, because I played, one of my favorite games is Final Fantasy Tactics, and I love that game. And I think it was because of this game first. I think so, because I found this game and loved it, and never got a chance to play through Final Fantasy VII when I was younger because it was hard to find. But Final Fantasy Tactics I got a hold of and realized this is Final Fantasy 1, but with the extra added layer of it's turn-based on a grid. And that is beautiful. That is so cool. And it all came from that first Final Fantasy game, where how much story is there in the game? You can talk to people and they can have like 2 lines of conversation. So it's not much, but it's there, and it's so cool that they could. So, these have just been some of my highlights of regular Nintendo. And really, down in the comments, I want to know what is it that you love from the regular Nintendo? Like, what's your top 5? Why? What are those things that speak to your heart? And maybe there's a game on here that I haven't mentioned, because I didn't even mention the Mega Man series at all. And those are some ones that, again, amazing games that have just spawned game after game after game for years. And it's so cool that so much came from the regular Nintendo time. There's a lot of stinkers, but there was a lot of winners that you never forget. And even the stinkers, sometimes you could have a ton of fun because they were so bad. They gave you something to laugh about. And I think that some of these games that we've had so much fun with because they were bad. And growing up, we actually had these there was like 3 different Christian games for the regular Nintendo, and they came out really late in the life cycle of the regular Nintendo, and a lot of them are knockoff copies of like Mario type games. And actually they're shocking that they were actually decently fun, and some of them were actually really hard. And you'd never, most people wouldn't know about those things. But it's the things you appreciate. So down in the comments, we'd like to know, what is your top 5 regular Nintendo games and why? What is it that really just gets you excited to play again sometimes, and just bring out your regular Nintendo, or a something like this, the Retro Duo, that gives you access to those again. So like to have you like, share, subscribe, and share down in the comments below what you think about our video and what your top 5s are as well. Take care, and I'll talk to you later. Bye now.